Can we please put our hands together to welcome Rishi Sunak, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and NDTV CEO and Editor-in-Chief, Rahul Kanwal.
Our next guest at the NDTV IndAI Summit, who spent the last several minutes being mobbed by very important people for selfies and a quick conversation, ran one of the world's most consequential democracies, and then walked straight to the nerve center of the AI revolution. Rishi Sunak served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, convened the world's first AI safety summit. In fact, what we're seeing in New Delhi at this moment, ladies and gentlemen, is an extension of a brainchild of the man I have on the stage. Can we have a warm round of applause for Rishi Sunak, please? Mr. Sunak serves as a senior advisor for both Microsoft and Anthropic, two of the world's most important companies defining the intelligence age at this moment. He's also a distinguished fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution. He sits at a rare intersection, a man who once had his finger on the regulatory trigger, now helping companies that may need to be regulated. Mr. Sunak, welcome. You've led a G7 country at a time when artificial intelligence moved from theory to statecraft, where AI is not just about innovation, but about jobs, national security, elections, and even trust. Let's kickstart this conversation by getting you to talk about how you've seen this journey from Bletchley Park, where you set up the first AI safety summit, then to Paris, and now 2026 New Delhi, where Prime Minister Modi's convening the AI Global Impact Summit. How have you seen this technological needle move and this global conversation about how society should be looking at artificial intelligence?
Thanks, Rahul. Good afternoon, everybody. And thanks for taking me back to that moment, because I came into Downing Street, and one of the things that happens is the foreign affairs team sit down with you, and then they go through your calendar for the next year. And then you realize just quite how many international summits there are. There's literally a summit for almost anything that you can think of under the sun. There were about 150, and they wanted me to go to all of them. Now, obviously, I couldn't do that. But I noticed that there wasn't a dedicated forum for leaders to come together to talk about AI. Now, informed by my time at Stanford, I was of the belief that this is going to be the most transformational thing that happens in our lifetimes. And we're lucky to live at a time that a general purpose technology comes along, because that's what AI is. And general purpose technologies have the ability to reshape our entire countries, economies, societies, with huge policy implications. And that's why I thought it was right to bring leaders together to discuss this topic on a regular basis. But crucially, and you hinted at it in your introduction, I wanted to do this differently to the typical G7, G20, because I thought it was important that the companies developing this technology were in the room. Because unlike previous iterations, it was the companies that were at the frontier. They're the ones that are deploying billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. This year, 20 times more being spent by these companies than the entire Manhattan Project, if you think about that major investment by the US. So I thought you had to bring all these groups together to walk through all the issues. That's what we did at Bletchley Park in the UK, and then from South Korea, Paris, and now India, which seems to me a very natural place to be having this conversation to cover all the topics that you touched on, because we're at this particular moment where, and I'll end on this, where I think the AI debate has moved from technology to strategy, from talking about the tools to talking about what countries are doing with these tools to have an impact in their societies.
Since you advise some of the world's leading AI companies, if you were advising the Indian government and the Indian people at this moment, how should India be looking at leveraging the AI age? Now, there are two ways that are being debated widely. One is that India must spend a lot of energy trying to build the use case layer of AI. The other is India must invest more deeply in the foundational systems on which AI models are based. Given your particular very unique lens, how should India be looking at the forces that are upon us at the moment?
I think India has recognized that leadership in technology doesn't depend just on inventing the technology. It depends on how effectively you deploy it in your country. So by focusing on mass adoption, I think supported by a very deep talent pool here, a strong digital public infrastructure, and a public that's very supportive and optimistic of the technology, I think India is well positioned to take a leadership role in AI. Indeed, I think that is increasingly reflected in some of the global rankings of these things. You mentioned I was associated with Stanford. Stanford do, I think, the most authoritative ranking of AI superpowers around the world, and India just went into third place, which I think is indicative that this strategy is working and India is assuming its rightful place as an AI superpower.
Given the speed at which technology is changing, how should society be looking at the issue of regulating AI? Because you're also a former prime minister in a room full of AI engineers, and society has compulsions which are very different from the motives that drive these AI companies, many of which are obviously driven by profit. What can we do? Because by the time our members of parliament and other people in government even determine what's at play and what they need to regulate, the next models are out which are very different from what they were planning for a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I think, Rahul, you make an excellent point, which is, you said, you're a kind of politician in a room full of engineers. And it's a fair point, because much to my parents' great disappointment, I didn't have a STEM degree, which they were sad about. But it was something that my team brought up when we hosted that first summit, and we were inviting all the leading frontier labs, and we were going to have these conversations. And one of them made the same point to me. It was like, are you going to be able to really keep up with the technical discussions that are going to happen here? And I said to this person, I said, you know what, my wife's uncle is a astrophysics professor at Caltech. My mother-in-law was one of the first female engineers at Telco. My brother-in-law is a computer scientist, and my father-in-law founded a software company. I said, if I can keep up with them at family dinner, I can probably handle the summit discussions. So it was good training. It was good training for that. But I think you touched on a genuine concern. And if I look around the world, there are varying attitudes towards AI. I mean, here in India, there's enormous optimism and trust, whereas in the West, I think the dominant feeling is one of anxiety. And I think closing that confidence gap is now not just a technical issue, but it's a policy issue. And if I think then about, well, how? I think it's the public sector where this battle for trust in AI is going to be won or lost. I think when citizens experience themselves better healthcare, faster government services, a more efficient interaction with the state, I think that's when this debate about trust in AI goes from abstract to reality, and that's how you can win people over to trusting the technology.
You're saying there's optimism and trust in AI, but over the last several weeks, stocks of several of the SaaS companies have been hammered, including your father-in-law's, the company that he founded, which are being beaten, and questions are being asked about whether by 2030 companies like Infosys, and I don't want you to speak just about one company, but the IT services companies would have any future at all. And we had the OpenAI policy head this morning, and he said that now people who are using AI can do the work that 7x people could do. The converse of that is that you need 1/7 the number of people that you would have required earlier, and that has very serious ramifications for joblessness, displacement in the labor markets. How should countries like India, because that was your sweet spot, your young demographic, a lot of which could now be restless and potentially underemployed or unemployed?
Yeah, I don't think this is something that just countries like India are grappling with. I think this is a topic of conversation that is dominating policymakers' thinking and conversations everywhere, in most countries, quite frankly. And look, I think AI is going to change the labor market. Some jobs will be lost. I think many more will be redesigned. And I think history shows us that societies flourish when we manage that transition well. The role of government isn't to stop innovation. It's to make sure that people can take on these new tasks and new roles with confidence and security. Now, I care about this. I have two young girls. And, what I think is, whilst of course there's going to be change, that doesn't mean that the role for humans is disappearing. It's just going to change. Every job that all of us do, I think, can be broken down into lots of different tasks. If you think about all of our lives, all of our jobs, it's a set of tasks in each job. Now, AI will be particularly good at some of them, but not all of them. And I think what we will need to do is not just to develop AI literacy. So all of us, at whatever stage in our careers we are, will need to develop an ability to use these tools, but we'll need to also just amp up those human skills that only we can bring, that judgment, that critical thinking, not so much the what, but knowing the why, and what how to critique the results of what comes back at you. I think these are a distinct set of skills that will always be relevant in a changing job market.
I'm not sure I agree with your response, because you're saying some jobs will be impacted. I heard Dario at Davos, where he made the point that more than half the white-collar jobs, anybody who's working on a computer or working with tech, a lot of the code that they're currently writing, and that's happening at Anthropic as well, where he's constantly saying that we're not writing as much code as we need to do. So it's not some jobs. This could be mass displacement, potentially of a kind we haven't seen, and this isn't necessarily several years out into the future. According to Anthropic, this could happen in a couple of years.
Yeah, so if you look back at history, I think so the conversation that we just had, what you just said, you could probably find someone saying something very similar at multiple points in our history when some new technological revolution came along. I think there's I saw somewhere a clip of, when Excel first came out, everyone thought that would be the end of accountants. And I'm sure if I did a show of hands in this room, there's probably more accountants today than there were back then, or bookkeepers. So Excel didn't do away with accountants or bookkeepers. It just created probably many more things for them to do. And actually MIT have done an interesting study on this point about the fact that over time technology creates new opportunities that we can't think of at the time. And that's quite hard for us to imagine. But they've looked at all the jobs that are in existence today and have concluded that around 60% or so didn't exist half a century ago. And I think that's just something to bear in mind. Even if we can't quite see how it's going to develop, history would tell you that technology has been able to create new jobs over time as we discover new things to do. Now, that said, I do think there is reason to be cautious. Now, some of the most dangerous words in the English language are "this time it's different," but there are credible people who think it might be different this time because of the wide-ranging application of AI. And that's why I think policymakers need to think about this very seriously. They need to be thinking about upskilling their populations to make sure that they're AI literate. I think we need to reimagine our education systems, that were designed to train you in a singular fashion for one job that you would then do for your career. That's gone, and we need to be able to iterate and learn throughout our careers. And I think the other thing we're going to need to learn how to do is to work with AI, work with agents. And one thing that I think my children will have to do, which will be very different from what I had to do, is at a very young age, when they enter the job market, they will be managers. Now, most people in their 20s don't manage other people, but I think today and tomorrow's 20-year-olds will be managing AI agents to help them accomplish their work and their tasks.
Give us insights from your own personal life. What are you doing with this battery of agents, and how are they different from your staff at 10 Downing Street?
You mean, how am I using AI? Yeah, probably like many of you, I'm using it to help me make better decisions, to help me be better informed, so I can exercise hopefully better judgment when I make those decisions in the way that probably many of us are using these tools. But they also have, I think quite good personal application. Actually, just very recently, my wife was away with you the other weekend.
She was fantastic.
Thank you.
You're a star. She was a bigger star. Many of my colleagues were there at the NDTV Art Awards, and interestingly, it happened right here in this hotel.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So
this story will be relevant then. So when she was setting off to come and spend a couple of days with you, and so I was doing my solo parenting that weekend at home in Yorkshire, and she said, our younger one, Anushka, has got a physics test, make sure you revise with her, because that's normally what she would do, and make sure she does well. And at that point, I was a bit stressed because I went through my in-laws. You know my in-laws. I thought, their definition of what doing well on a physics test is probably a little bit higher than mine, especially seeing as I haven't done any physics since I was 16. But anyway, I was very worried. But then Claude came to the rescue. So I put my daughter's revision test into Claude, and it prepared basically a teaching guide for me. So it could teach me how to teach her in plain English that I could understand. All the answers and the explanatory notes. And then at the end of it, it created a kind of 4-page revision handout for her of key concepts that she could take into her test the next week. And I thought at the end of that, and then she, thankfully she did well on the test. Or so she tells me.
Papa passed the test.
Yeah, well, yeah, so I said, if AI can turn me into a Murthy family level physics tutor, there is nothing that it can't do. So at that moment, I felt very optimistic about where we're heading.
Artificial general intelligence is now going from the realm of science fiction to near-term possibility. And again, Anthropic has been saying that this could happen within the next 2 years. There's a big debate between Google DeepMind and Anthropic about the timelines, but if it is, say, 2 years away, what should governments like India, according to you, be doing, which they're not doing at this moment, to deal with the reality of a situation where artificial intelligence and machines are more intelligent than humans and can do things smarter than humans?
Yeah, I think this is something that has become a more acute topic in the last couple of months, because when I first got into the job as PM, and we talked about it at the summit, at that point there was a skepticism about whether the pace of AI development would actually continue. The so-called scaling laws, where the more data, compute, and algorithm that you put in, the better the output of the models. And there was a skepticism that relationship would carry on going in the exponential way that it was. What's actually been the case over the last few years is not only that relationship held, and we've seen that continued development, but as you, I think, hinted in your question, Rahul, it seems to be accelerating over the last few months. And if you talk to Demis from DeepMind, or Dario, or I was just with Alexander Wang from Meta, all of them would say the same thing, that they've noticed this acceleration and this so-called recursive self-improvement, where the models are improving at a faster rate than previously. And the reason they are doing that is because they are able to use AI to help them build the next model. And that is the kind of key thing that has changed. So I think your observation is right. We're at this point of, it seems, acceleration. And that takes me back to the first summit, where I said it's important that we give people confidence that this technology is safe. And we in the UK created the AI Security Institute. India has created something similar. And I think these institutions are important, and I think they should work together, because what citizens want to know is that the people in charge have got the technical capability to evaluate this technology and make sure that it is safe to use, that it is not going to run away from us. And it's a government's job to help make that a reality. I got reminded of this, my 2 young girls, when they use these models and the chatbots and they're going back and forth on things, they're very polite, and they always say please and thank you when they go through their conversations. I said to them, you don't need to say please and thank you. It's polite, but it's not a person. And by the way, it takes up a lot of compute power, so better if you don't. But they said, Daddy, if AI takes over the world, we want to have been polite to the AI. I thought it was good insurance policy. But look, I think it speaks to this point about being able to ensure people can trust the technology. And I think as governments develop, what they need to do is develop this capability. And we can't leave it to people to mark their own homework. And that's what the AI
unfortunately for your girls,
do.
Machines don't care about what humans think. And for companies like Anthropic or Google DeepMind, safety is a publicly stated priority. I have 2 concerns. One, several of these safety engineers and those in charge of safety keep leaving and writing all kinds of very emotional notes about why they'd rather do poetry than work on AI safety. And secondly, this is at companies which are interested in safety. What about autocratic nations, China, Russia, where safety isn't prioritized? How concerned are you by bad actors using these emergent technologies for bioterrorism, for creating chaos of a kind which humanity will then struggle to deal with.
And that was exactly why our first summit focused on these risks. This new technology was coming along. I think everyone could see that it was going to be able to do lots of incredible things, but people worried about exactly that. There were always bad actors in the world who were going to use tools for ends that none of us would agree with or support. And that's why I think it's critical that governments have that independent capability to evaluate the safety of these models. And actually only governments can do some of that. When you talked about some of those risks, they're national security risks. Cyber, bio, chemical, nuclear, radiological. Our security services, intelligence services, defense services, they have a particular expertise and capability in understanding what those risks are. And certainly in the UK, we ensure that those people work with that institute to do the testing on all these models, to make sure that we're on top of any vulnerabilities and can talk to the companies about fixing them. And so far that has worked well. And the companies have cooperated. You're right to say, look, we can't control what everyone does in every part of the world, which is why I think forums like this are so important. India bringing together people from all over the world at these summits gives us that opportunity to talk to other countries about how they're dealing with these things, share best practice, and hopefully over time have a bit more global collaboration on this important issue.
You've said that AI is not just a race between China and the United States, that adoption matters as much as frontier development. India is investing a lot in artificial intelligence, and we've seen the kind of interest there was with people wanting to get into Bharat Mandapam. You saw the best and the worst of India all at the same time. But do you think India has a genuine shot at being a shaper, a player in this AI universe? Or is our country more likely to end up using models and technologies developed in the West?
I think India is shaping up to take a leadership role in AI. And I talked about the Stanford Index, India already in third place. But then just look what sits underneath that. What are the strengths, the assets that India is bringing to the table? First is a very deep talent pool, right? Just the sheer number of highly skilled AI literate engineers here dwarfs almost anywhere else in the world. So that's a huge competitive advantage. The second thing is digital public infrastructure. Right? I don't need to tell all of you, but you should know just how special and distinctive that DPI is. The combination of Aadhaar, UPI, and then the Ayushman Bharat health accounts now, provide a distribution rail where you can build applications that can serve over 1 billion people. I mean, that is pretty extraordinary. And then you combine that with the incredible innovative ecosystem that you've got here, which you talked about, the energy at the summit yesterday, all that young, hungry talent, and as we talked about earlier on, a population that is very supportive and optimistic about the technology. Those are differentiating strengths. And I think as we talked about, India's recognized that leadership in technology is not just about inventing it, it's about deploying it effectively in your country. And India's focus on this mass adoption, building on those strengths, is why it is in the leadership position that it is today.
You wrote in the Wall Street Journal that democratic countries need to come together to work on a collective AI framework so that authoritarian systems don't take over. There's also been conversation about the need for a Bretton Woods framework around artificial intelligence. But then the reality of the world is that Donald Trump is president of the United States, and we're seeing what he's doing with existing frameworks and guardrails. What trust can countries like India have in investing in a global AI framework when current frameworks, multilateral frameworks built after the Second World War, are themselves in peril?
Yeah, it's certainly the case that the old multilateral order that we knew is gone, and we haven't quite figured out what we're transitioning to, which makes this a unpredictable and challenging time, as you mentioned, Rahul. But I think actually India is positioned well to succeed in that new world. Just think what's happened in the past few weeks and months. India's signed free trade deals, not just with my country, the UK, but also the EU. That is a sign of countries getting together and maintaining those close relationships, in fact, deepening them in the face of a US which is approaching those same issues slightly differently, if I can put it that way, to it has in the past. And again, this summit, the fact that India is convening all these people in a multilateral way to discuss these issues, I think is a positive sign. But if I could maybe touch on another thing which gives me some optimism about this, it's, Prime Minister Modi's theme for this summit, or one of them, is impact. And if I think about what makes me excited about AI and how will it bring countries closer together, it's because AI doesn't just raise the ceiling. I think AI can lift the floor. And that has been, I think, a great passion of Prime Minister Modi's when he's been talking about AI. And I happen to think that AI is going to be one of the most uplifting, democratizing forces that humanity has seen. And if you think about these incredible global public goods, healthcare, education, right? And then if I add on to that agriculture, which is something that in many developing countries is core to giving people a better standard of living, in those three areas, AI is about to transform them for the better, so that countries that today are further behind are going to be able to leapfrog and catch up and overtake others and deliver an enormously increased standard of living to their citizens.
The flip side of that is that power gets concentrated in the hands of a few tech oligarchs, largely out of San Francisco.
But I don't think that has to be the case. And if you look at the applications that are being developed here, and look at the types of models that are being used, whether they're open source or others that you can build them on, these are designed to work in actually a very low-cost way. Right? The agricultural innovations that we're seeing with AI are designed to work on a farmer's phone without some super high-falutin laptop or broadband connection, but to give him the improvement in yield, reduced crop cycle times, water usage that you couldn't dream of before. Similarly in education. And I happen to think that's one of the most powerful ways to lift people up. But now the ability to have personalized tutoring at low cost for millions and millions of children everywhere, or healthcare provided in the most rural parts of Africa or India at the same quality that you would get in big cities in developed countries, that is extraordinary. And I think this is to your point about multilateralism. I think there will be an enormous number of countries that will want to work together on delivering those outcomes. And actually the conversations at this summit being led by India are on that topic. And it's so good that that topic is getting focus. I mean, AI, as I said, should be one of the most uplifting, democratizing forces that we have seen in our entire lifetimes. And I think it's unsurprising, indeed quite natural, that India wants to take a lead in making that a reality for countries around the world.
You invited China to Bletchley Park. Some consider that to be bold diplomacy. Some consider that to be naivete. Since 2023, tech tensions between China and Washington have largely gone up. And we're already seeing data decoupling happening to a great extent. Do you think cooperation between democracies and autocracies on AI is still possible? Or are we looking at a very definitive fracture which splits the world into two AI universes?
I'm an optimist, so I'd like to believe that it is possible. And if you look at what's happened in the past, I mean, particularly around the issue of nuclear weapons, you've seen dialogue that was able to happen between geopolitical rivals. And hopefully that gives us some encouragement and optimism that it will be possible in the future as well. I think it would be positive. And as to why I invited China to the summit, I thought dialogue was important. I think this is the defining technology of our time. And in an ideal world, you would be having a dialogue with what are clearly important, significant powers in the world. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to agree with everyone on everything. It means there are countries that have different values and different interests to yours, and you have to be eyes wide open about that. But I think the principle of dialogue to understand and try and come to some common understanding, I think is one that we should continue to pursue.
You've been Prime Minister, technocrat, Prime Minister, advisor to different tech companies. Given what's happening with the politics of the United Kingdom, is going back or trying to go back to 10 Downing Street still on your list of agentic tasks? Is that something you've given up on?
No, I mean, I'm still very happily a member of Parliament. and I represent my fantastic constituency in North Yorkshire, and it gives me an enormous amount of fulfillment to do that and make sure I do a good job representing my constituents and making sure actually that this technology works for them. I have a very rural constituency, so we've been talking about the benefits in farming. Education is something that I'm passionate about. Akshta and I have recently set up an education charity called the Richmond Project, named after my constituency, which helps people get greater confidence with numbers, which is something that I think is an uplifting thing in life, and we're seeing how technology can help with that. And my general view on these things, Rahul, is you get into these jobs, you get into politics because you believe in public service. I certainly did, and you think you can make a difference. Now, just because you're not doing that particular job does not mean that that desire to keep serving, to keep making a difference disappears. And I still have that, and I will always have that, and you just have to find different outlets to make that difference, and that's what I'm trying to do in this new chapter of my life.
You said you're happily settled as Member of Parliament in the United Kingdom. Given the number of people, mostly women, who are clamoring to take selfies before the session, I'm quite certain that there are a few constituencies in India where if you try to stand for MPship, you may have a good shot. Many people in the hall have come specifically to listen to you. Rishi Sunak, for joining us, taking out time on a crazy, chaotic day, and joining us at the NDTV Ind AI Summit. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much, Rahul. Thank you.